So the fifth chapter of Ketubot really deals with, if you like, division of property between a wife and husband. And the first Mishnah of the sixth chapter kind of carries on this theme just by declaring, I mean, we've learned this already in the fourth chapter, that that essentially a woman's the work that a woman produces is given to husband, but that's in return for maintenance. So that's how the sixth chapter begins. But then the sixth chapter veers very rapidly into questions of money related to the ketubah itself. So it very rapidly switches tack from the division of money during the marriage to the division of money before the marriage. And it actually begins with a kind of a slightly tragic situation, but probably quite an important and perhaps quite a common one, just to sort of work through. Someone who pledged money for his son-in-law. So this must have been agreed at the time of the betrothal. Umeit chatano, and his son-in-law died. So he'd set aside money for the dowry, and it's not going to happen. And the assumption of this Mishnah is, however, that the wife who is betrothed is now she's now a shomeret yavam. She needs yibum because she's engaged. She's been betrothed to a childless husband. So she's going to marry, or she might marry, unless she does chalitza, she might marry his brother. So we're not talking about the son-in-law now. We're talking about the brother of the son-in-law. And the Mishnah continues. So he pledged money for his son-in-law, and his son-in-law died. Amru Chachamim, the sages said, Yachol hu sheyomar. The sages said, oh, he can declare. And he's now speaking to the brother, to the living brother. La'achicha hayiti rotzeh liten, velach I efshar liten. I was willing to give to your brother. I was willing to give to your brother when he was alive. But now, to you, it's not possible. He's going to change his mind. We don't know why he's changing his mind, but the sages seem to be articulating the fact that he's got the right to change his mind, i.e., the ownership over this money doesn't pass until the marriage takes place. The pledge is not a transfer of ownership. Although, clearly, if the son-in-law had not died, I guess the son-in-law could pursue the pledge, right? But the Yavam cannot. What if she pledged to bring money in? So maybe she's bringing money into the marriage. She pledged to bring in 1,000 dinar. He actually pledges a corresponding sum of 15 money, which is 1,500 dinars. So he actually writes in the ketubah that she has a right to 1,500 dinars if he dies or if she's divorced. So this is really interesting. She's going to get back more than she put in. And the assumption is that because, as we learned actually in the first Mishnah of the chapter, because he has the right to any income from her wealth during the course of the marriage, that 1,000 dinar are worth more than 1,000 dinar, so to speak. Obviously he has to, on his death or on divorce, she gets the 1,000 dinars back. But in the meantime, he can actually use them. He can invest them. He could buy a field. He could rent it out. And for that reason, the amount written in the ketubah is actually larger than the amount that she brings into the marriage. Now, it doesn't always work that way. When she brings in some property which is valued, so she must have brought in some furniture or some other kind of movable property, And if she brought in land, then the land wouldn't be valued. The land would just be noted in terms of its location in the Ketubah. So the land is land, basically. It's not, we don't value it, we just record it. But if she brought in movable property, it will be valued. And there's an assumption here that when a bride brings property into a marriage, people are incredibly optimistic and generous about how they value it. And no one is going to dispute the valuation coming up to the wedding. So the amount written in the ketubah is actually a fifth less. It is assumed to be overvalued by 25%, i.e., has to be downvalued by a fifth to get the proper amount of the ketubah. So, does it always work like that? If it's valued at one money, but actually it's really worth the money. So this seems to be kind of valued by a professional valuer rather than just kind of a declaration that's what she's bringing to the marriage. Money. At that point, he's only got a money. We're only talking about a money here, no more and no less. But if we're going back to just a general valuation, in other words, we don't have a market valuation. So in other words, if he writes in the ketubah goods valued at a maneh, which is 100 dinars, she's actually going to bring in 31 dinar. She's going to bring in 31. This should be 31 seller and a dinar. She's going to bring in 31 seller and a dinar, and there's a lacuna, there's a hole actually in the count of the manuscript. The manuscript is a bit ragged at this point, and it's got many corrections. And the English is the right translation, 31 seller and a dinar, because that adds up to 125 dinari, right? We're going to do the 1/5 reduction, so that takes from 125 down to 100. But the Hebrew says, it should be shloshim ve'echad seller ve'dinar, and we're missing the seller. Arba me'od, hu nosen chamesh me'od. If he writes 400, if it's written 400, he gives 500. Now, again, this is very, very odd because he always gives less than the amount. He always writes less than she gives. Most editions say, actually here, say she gives. Most editions say 400, that is, he writes 400 in the ketubah, she gives 500. This is a valuation, right? We're going to reduce it by a fifth. And the Mishnah concludes, Ukshachatan posek, hu posek pachot chomesh. When a bridegroom pledges, he agrees 1/5 less. So the Kaufman manuscript seems to be wrong here. And by the way, it was corrected at this point. So we're not dealing with the original manuscript. We're actually dealing with the correction. And something was rubbed out underneath the correction. We can't quite see what was rubbed out. So I think the version in the square bracket is probably right, but I can't promise. And then sort of just reviewing. So yeah, when we've said a seller's 4 dinars and a maneh is 100 dinars. So just to emphasize what we learned, that remember, if she brings in 1,000 dinars, he has to give a corresponding sum of 15 maneh, 1,500. And so the Mishnah is going to conclude all these calculations by saying, Pascal hachnis lo ksafim sal'o venesei shishim dinar. If she pledged to bring him cash, the seller counts as 6 dinar. A seller is normally 4 dinars, but it's going to count as 6. In other words, we're going to upgrade it by 50. We're going to upgrade it by 50% because he can use that money during the marriage. And for each maneh that the wife brings in, he accepts on himself to bring 10 dinars for the basket. We're not quite sure what the basket is. Maybe it's a spice basket. Maybe it's a kupar. Maybe it's the account. The word kupar, some people say it's a perfume basket. None of the commentators agree. But anyway, he seems to set aside 10 dinars for her purposes for every money that she brings in. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, and Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, and of course this is very common, by the way, in the Mishnah, Kol Kaminhag Hamadina. Everything goes according to the local custom. And we've seen this many times in the Mishnah. We're going to see it many times more.